Excellency Muhammad Buhari, President of the Federal Republic of Nigeria, Excellencies, senior officials, Ibrahim Magu, Acting Chairman of the Economic and Financial Crimes Commission, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I'm very glad to be back in Abuja. Before I start, I want to congratulate the previous speaker, and don't expect as good a performance from me, but I'll give you something different. I would like to thank you, Mr. President, for the kind invitation to join you at this important summit. And I wish to start by calling to mind the greatness of this nation, the diversity, creativity, and ambition of Nigerians represent Africa. The achievements of Nigeria's sons and daughters here at home and in your global diaspora make our continent proud. Nigeria has always shown common cause with Africa's progress and prosperity, and this does not go unnoticed. This country is truly the engine of Africa's potential. This is how we see Nigeria. I hope you know that. We stand in solidarity with your efforts to build on all the assets with which this country has been blessed, and we are invested in your success. I'm aware that the summit's theme focuses on curbing electoral spending. I look forward to hearing from the experts on strategies for eliminating this form of corruption. However, in order to succeed in the ultimate goal, we have to keep the broader context in mind. That is why I suggest we reframe the fight against corruption in positive terms as a struggle for transparency, public integrity, and accountability. In fact, on this note, I wish to state that there is one of your own who wrote a book titled "Fight Against Corruption is Dangerous." So she gave me the book. We met somewhere in the United States. And as I was looking at the title, I reminded her, I said, you know, you need to be thinking of writing another book to state that not fighting corruption is even more dangerous. So this is a campaign that can be won. Tolerating corruption is a choice, not an inevitability. It is within our power to end it. That is the most important starting point. Otherwise, it would be a waste of time for us to keep talking about it. The primary responsibility to act lies with leaders at every level, where corruption has become the norm, a way of life. It is because leaders have made it acceptable and have made it that way. We tend to focus on the petty corruption of everyday life, while turning a blind eye to the more consequential forms that people only whisper about because the rich and the powerful are the main beneficiaries. Let me again here tell you a story. You know, I was traveling and my plane made a stopover in one of the countries on our continent. And at the airport, I didn't go to leave the plane. I stayed around. They were refueling. I walked around outside, and there happened to be policemen I found at that airport. And a policeman approached me as I was strolling around, stretching, and he pointed to my chest and was asking me for something. So I didn't understand because I was just putting on a shirt, my jeans, and thinking, happily he had not even recognized who I was. Then, so I looked around, I was wondering, I asked him, I said, what is it? And he didn't understand English. So he kept pointing, showing at my chest. I had not realized I had a pen in my pocket. So I pulled out my pen and I was showing the policeman. I said, is this what you want? He said, yes. Then I told him, I said, you wait. So I understood what it was, and he was carrying a gun as well, and so on. So I went back to the plane. I asked the pilots whether anybody had some money on him. So the pilot gave me a $10 bill. So I came out and gave the policeman the $10 and the pen he wanted. So he was very grateful. But that left something on my mind. In fact, later on when I went back home, having a cabinet meeting, I told the cabinet, I said, you know, I told them the story. And I said, since you have a mission to carry out and against corruption, I said, there are things I saw in this. We are having a policeman on duty, and then he's begging for every little thing. I said, what that means, I'm sure, I told them, I said, maybe it is also happening here in our country. But what that would mean is that maybe we are making too many demands on this policeman. We are not paying them well. They are literally impoverished, and they have to keep going around. Later on, if you don't give him that kind of thing, maybe he will use a gun to. So I said, why don't we find all possible ways? Let's start from here home. And we don't have so much, even as a country, but we can share equitably the little we have, so that even the policeman feels they are taken care of. And they are getting so little because there is so little across in the country, not getting so little when others are getting so much. So we have to create that balance. So in a way, it was to inform ourselves of the complexity and the efforts we have to carry out and the multifaceted problem we have to deal with. But in other words, corruption needs to be tackled from the top down. This is not only the fairest approach, it is also the most effective because it empowers the public to join the fight and hold leaders accountable through elections and other means. In that way, corruption can definitely be reduced to the minimum possible, and that makes a tremendous difference. However, it also takes careful organization and messaging to make this practice widespread. Overcoming corruption is really about 4 key principles, in my opinion: culture, responsibility, accountability, and effectiveness. We must discard the myth that corruption is endemic to particular cultures. Corruption is a universal weakness, not an African one. And it is not part of our destiny as a continent. Indeed, research has shown that some of the biggest sources and beneficiaries of corruption are outside of Africa. And this has always been the case, by the way. When somebody gives you addictive drugs with one hand and offers the cure with the other hand, it is not altruism, but a form of control that encourages passivity. In the absence of a politics that values individual integrity, even well-established institutions are not enough to deter wrongdoing, as has been demonstrated by repeated scandals in advanced economies at the top of international transparency rankings. That is why it is past time to redefine transparency as a global objective that requires us all to work together with mutual respect. Corruption does not take decades to eradicate. Huge gains can be made relatively quickly once we decide to break the habit. That brings me to responsibility. This principle is inherent to our respective cultures in Africa. We are in charge of our own future. the purpose of transparency is not to impress others, but rather to make our own societies better, because that is what our people expect. The third and fourth foundation stones are accountability and effectiveness. Without transparency, it is impossible to earn and keep the trust of the people. And without trust, we will not be able to effectively use national wealth to make measurable improvements to the well-being of our citizens. We have to set our sights high. It is not enough to fight corruption, just as merely fighting poverty is too small an ambition for Africa. We want to create value, we want to create wealth, not merely fighting corruption. Our liberation struggle in Rwanda and in Africa more generally has always been based on the ideals of eliminating discrimination, entrenching good governance, and ensuring all citizens benefit equally from nation building. As a new government, the turning point in Rwanda's peace-building process came after months of intense national consultations. Out of this dialogue, key institutions were created to foster transparency and lay the foundation for a sound national fiscal base. These included the Rwanda Revenue Authority, the Auditor General, the Ombudsman, as well as homegrown solutions such as performance contracts signed by officials at every level known as imihigo. But we must make sure that these institutions, these mechanisms actually work. They are created to give us results. We quickly found out that fighting corruption has a huge political cost. One of the things I was referring to about the book is this one. Officials who did not live up to the agreed standards were dismissed or brought to justice. Others fled into exile and pretended to be so-called opposition or pro-democracy groups. I'll give you a specific example here. After the genocide, the first government we put in place, the first foreign minister appointed at the time connived with some other leaders within our cabinet, particularly the prime minister at the time, and was given money, cash, hundreds of thousands of dollars, to go abroad and reopen embassies or open new embassies. This guy never came back. And he had been in office just for a couple of months. And this was the first transition government. Now, The story I want to arrive at is that today he's one of the opposition leaders living in France. So, and people accept this is a man fighting for democracy. Where he's hosted, they believe that. Some groups believe that. So he's not only one, because in fact, a couple of years later, the same prime minister who he connived with, I don't know, I don't want to say this for sure, but he agreed with the then president of the transition. He was my president. He was given another lot. In fact, no, he wasn't given the whole amount, but the idea was to go and buy vehicles, of course, Mercedes-Benzes, for the cabinet ministers. But he had to carry the money also in cash. So I went to my president, and when I learned about this, and I said, President, first of all, we are making a mistake. Our first priority shouldn't be buying Mercedes-Benzes for our ministers. You can imagine in 1998, that's 4 years after the genocide. We are trying to build institutions. We are trying to do a number of things. And the first thing that came to mind of our leaders was to buy Mercedes-Benzes for ministers. So ministers who have no offices, office buildings, no furniture, no nothing. And so I went to the president and told him, I thought it was wrong. I told him, my president, I think this is wrong. We cannot afford, first of all, to prioritize this type of thing. Second, to have money cash, again, given to one of us. The other one went and never came back. And never brought her. So now this one is taking even more money. I said, we can't keep doing this kind of thing unless we are to be, in the end, doomed and never to leave the transition. So, but I'm showing you how that is the cost. The cost, you risk many things. You risk these bad names, because in the end, these same so-called opposition have turned us into what they call authoritarian. So we are authoritarian because we didn't allow them to take this money, or when they took it, they never came back, so they had to find an explanation. But between fighting corruption and being authoritarian, I prefer being called authoritarian. Some thought we could not afford to take this zero tolerance approach because of this, given the fragility of our environment. The truth, however, is that we couldn't afford not to do it. It is the foundation of the modest progress for which Rwandans continue to work. Everywhere, trust in democratic processes is declining, leaving a cynical citizenry that is easily manipulated by the politics of division. Fighting political corruption is therefore just as urgent as fighting economic corruption. And the strategy for doing so is the same: building on Africa's cultural heritage to cultivate the mindsets of responsibility, accountability, and effectiveness in our leaders, and especially in our young people as we continue to build and strengthen the institutions that will serve this cause. Before I conclude, President Buhari, I wish to give you our very warm congratulations on your re-election, and best wishes for the entire Nigerian people on the road ahead. I also want to mention here that President Buhari is our AU's champion in the fight against corruption, and we thank you for. So, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for your kind attention, and I wish you fruitful deliberations.